our number 10 spot, we of course have Alcatraz. Alcatraz is one of the world's most known prisons. It's a prison located off the coast of San Francisco, and when it was active, it was a federal prison. It became known as one of the hardest prisons in the United States, where only the worst prisoners were kept. Apparently, it was known for its poor living conditions, along with starvation and horrible, torturous punishments. There were many killings, suicides, and so much violence that it's not a surprise that people believe it to be haunted. Specifically in a section of the prison called D Block, where a prisoner was complaining of an evil spirit in his cell, and the guards found him dead in the next morning. There are many ghost stories, even one where people have claimed to have seen Al Capone in the shower, hopefully naked. Not because I'm a creep, but because the thought of a naked ghost in the shower is just funny to me. In our number 9 spot, we have the Kingston Penitentiary. In Kingston, Ontario, Canada, there is a former maximum security prison called the Kingston Penitentiary. I actually visited this prison when I was a kid, and I remember being terrified. It was so spooky from the outside. Anyway, Kingston Pen has a ton of stories told by people that have formerly worked there and people that have visited the prison. Stories such as feeling cold in strange places to experiencing gut feelings to leave where you are right now. There are stories and sightings of a ghost of an old staff member by the name of William Wentworth, who goes up and down the halls and locks the cell doors. He was killed by what is assumed to be a prisoner. However, his killer was never actually caught. He'll probably haunt the place until his killer is caught, because that's some major unfinished business. In our number 8 spot, we have the Maxwell Street Police Station. Known for being one of the most violent and brutal police stations, it is located in a neighborhood called Bloody Maxwell in Chicago. So if that doesn't say it all, then I don't know what to tell you. The city apparently was flooded with mobsters, and the police station was filled with corruption. The dungeon in the basement is where the paranormal rumors come from. It was known as a place for torture, and most criminals would never leave the station after going in there. People have reported the rattling of handcuffs on cell bars, as well as screams from past prisoners. It closed in 1997, and fun fact, the cast of Chicago PD get to hang out with the ghost all the time as it is filmed there. In our number 7 spot, we have the Mansfield, Ohio Reformatory. The Mansfield, Ohio Reformatory was built between 1886 to 1910 and closed in 1990. So many of these prisons closed in 1990, there must have been a huge shift in the prison world in terms of how the prisoners were treated and whatnot at that time. Anyways, this prison is famous for being the inspiration behind the movie Shawshank Redemption, one of my mom's personal favorites, along with Schindler's List. She likes to cry. It is known for being haunted, and so I had to put it on this list. Witnesses have reported paranormal activity in the basement where the solitary confinement cells were. People have reported seeing ghosts, hearing screams and moans from the former prisoners, as well as the haunting of one of the warden's wives, who was apparently fatally injured at the prison. In our number 6 spot, we have the Tower of London. Apparently, it is known to be one of the most haunted places in London. It was meant to be a safe place for the royal family at first, then became a dark, horrifying place for prisoners. There are apparently thousands of ghost sightings here, and among them is Thomas A. Becket, who is believed to have caused problems with some of the construction with the tower. But apparently Queen Anne Boleyn is one of the most spotted ghosts. Many have reported seeing a headless body walking through the tower corridors, which would make sense as the tower is close to the site where she was executed. This is wild. I really want to go there now. I want to see a headless ghost. It would be better if it was nearly headless, like, you know, Harry Potter's nearly headless Nick, but whatever, this will do. In our number 5 spot, we have Old Richmond Jail. Located in Tasmania, Australia, this isn't the most widely known jail, but it is definitely one of the scariest, it seems. seems. This place was built around 1825, and it has a whipping yard, a cookhouse, solitary confinement cells, and basically anything you can imagine a scary prison would have. It has many ghost sightings and is believed to be heavily haunted. From sightings of a lady in a pink dress, to ghost young ones, to feeling cold shivers and hearing strange noises, there have been too many encounters to count. Best to stay away from touring this prison unless you love ghosts, and never mind. Proceed. In our number 4 spot, we have the Eastern State Penitentiary. This is a prison that operated as a sort of solitary confinement. It opened in 1829 and was active until 1971. It was meant to psychologically harm the prisoners, with the noise being kept to a bare minimum. Many who misbehaved were tortured in various ways, including what was called the mad chair, where inmates were strapped to a chair so tightly that their circulation was cut off. So yeah, it's understandable that it is props haunted. Many have reported hearing crying, screaming, whispers, and even footsteps around the prison. People have also reported seeing dark shadows, and even Al Capone once complained that he was haunted by a ghost named James Clark, who was a victim of the St. Valentine's Massacre. In our number 3 spot, we have the Old Geelong Jail. It could be pronounced Geelong. I don't know. I tried looking it up. I think it's Geelong, we're going with it. Another Australian prison that is said to be pretty fierce. It was built between 1849 to 1864 and was open until 1991. In addition to being a jail, this place was also used by the Australian Army as a post-World War II detention center. It was also an industrial school for girls. So yeah, there is a mixed bag of ghosts at this place. Over 500 plus deaths occurred in this place. People have claimed that particular areas of the jail are haunted by a demon, as well as apparently an old guard haunts this place. In fact, there are reports of sightings in shock blocks, the walkways, the morgue, and even the kitchen, and it seems that perhaps it's more than one demon that haunts this place. Strange smells and violent attacks have been reported, along with screams. Well, thank the Lord this place has closed up shop. I wouldn't wish a ghost haunting on even my worst enemy. In our number 2 spot, we have the San Lucas Prison. This is a prison that is located on the San Lucas Island, which is a Costa Rican island. Many prisoners who were sent there saw the death penalty. The prison is notoriously known for its extremely poor living conditions and torture methods. Apparently, about 60 men would be crammed into a cell at a time. There were cells underground used for solitary confinement, and get this, they were typically flooded with water and sewage. Just disgusting. Yeah, if I was a prisoner that was put in a room with sewage, you best believe I'm coming back to haunt every one of those horrible people that worked there that clearly should have been prisoners themselves. Did I mention the artwork on the walls that was made from human blood? Yeah, forgot that one. It's known to be haunted by a priest and a nurse that worked there, as well as obviously the former inmates. People continue to hear screaming, begging, and crying men till this day. In our number 1 spot, we have the West Virginia State Penitentiary. The prison is so haunted that they even offer ghost tours at this point. Well, might as well capitalize on it. I would. Apparently, they also offer escape room type events, and that sounds horrible to me. First off, it's a real prison, and second, this is a prison that is known for its ghosts. What fun! Let's pretend to be prisoners and escape a real cell and hang out with the ghosts for an hour. Nah thanks, honey. Anyways, this prison is known for having the worst of the worst criminals and many executions. So many of the prisoners were killed by other prisoners, and what is suspected as by some of the guards as well. It is known as one of the most haunted prisons in the United States. Most of the ghost sightings comes from the North Hall, where the most dangerous criminals were kept, where people have reported shadows and footsteps. Apparently also the Hole and the Sugar Shack underground underground have many reports of people feeling panic when down there, and a paranoid feeling of being watched. I hope that's not where the escape rooms are.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have Moundsville Penitentiary. The eerie echo of evil emanates from the Moundsville Penitentiary in West Virginia, an institution notorious for its savage treatment of inmates. With hundreds of deaths recorded, many a grim tale cling to its damp walls. The most chilling among these is the quote-unquote Shadow Man, a phantom silhouette that roams the prison grounds. Patrons claim to have seen this spectral figure, believed to embody the heinous deeds committed within the penitentiary, darting across the walls before dissolving into thin air. As if this wasn't enough, spine-tingling laughter and spectral whispers resonate through the deserted corridors, a disconcerting reminder of the prison's gruesome past. All in all, visiting this prison is truly a haunting experience, and it's definitely not recommended. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Kingston Penitentiary. The Kingston Penitentiary in Canada is the country's oldest prison, and it bristles with horrifying tales. The secret of this place lies in its inhumane past, where it was notorious for its cruel and unusual punishments. Aside from these stories of savage punishments, however, the penitentiary's most alarming secret lies in the tragic story of George Hewell, an inmate killed by his cellmates. According to legend, Hewell's spirit is trapped within the institution's chilling stone confines, his spectral presence witnessed around his former cell. This eerie manifestation only intensifies the sense of dread pervading this historic prison. Any way you spin it, this prison is definitely not suitable for your next tourist vacation. In our number 8 spot today, we have Patarei Prison. The Patarei Prison in Indonesia, infamous for wartime torment, holds a blood-curdling secret. This gruesome establishment is said to house a well where the bodies of those who faced unseen horrors at the prison were discarded. It's believed that the spirits of the tormented rise under the cloak of darkness, seeking retribution for their gruesome fate, and I have to say, could anyone blame them? There are so many stories of horrifying treatment, it's no wonder these tales go hand in hand with the tales of terrifying hauntings. Scary stories of spectral soldiers and the haunted faces of the deceased give the prison an ambiance that sends shivers down the spine of even the most intrepid explorer. In our number 7 spot today, we have Bodmin Jail. Across the pond in England, tucked away in the beautiful landscape, you will find Bodmin Jail. This brooding, centuries-old prison has a ghostly tale or two to chill even the bravest of souls. Built in the year 1779, its stone walls have seen more than their fair share of pain, suffering, and death, particularly from hanging. The jail's most unsettling tale is the ghostly apparition of Selina Wadge. Convicted for the unthinkable act of killing her own son, Selina paid the ultimate price for her crime at the end of the hangman's noose. However, her spirit appears to be bound to the place of her execution, unable to find rest in the afterlife. Visitors of the derelict prison often report sightings of Selina's mournful ghost weeping inconsolably in the dank, chilling bowels of the building. Her spectral figure, awash with sorrow and regret, adds a bone-chilling layer to the already creepy aura of Bodmin Jail. The eerie silence of the prison seems to amplify her phantom cries, echoing through the hollow halls and sending shivers down the spine of anyone brave or foolish enough to explore this haunting relic of history. In our number 6 spot today, we have the Old Idaho Penitentiary. The Old Idaho Penitentiary, operational from 1872 to 1973, is steeped in a very dark past. The haunted secret in this one lies in the most unlikely of places, however, the prison's rose garden. Its rose garden holds a chilling secret, and it all starts with the garden being tended to by inmates on good behavior. This is all fine and well, and actually sounds like a moderately nice time, all things considered, but things take a very dark turn when you learn that this spot was also where several convicts were executed by hanging. Now, this has of course led to strange phenomena being reported around the rose garden, with spectral figures and ghostly faces appearing among the flowers. A sensation of despair and sorrow often overcomes visitors, and it is a chilling reminder of the lives cut short on that very spot. In our number 5 spot today, we have Fremantle Prison. In the land down under, amidst the serene, picturesque landscapes and crazy huge spiders, lies a monument to humanity's dark side, Fremantle Prison. Once a fortress for punishment, this stark, sandstone monolith houses a terrifying secret deep within its dark, convoluted tunnels. The labyrinth beneath Fremantle was forged by the hands of the very inmates it imprisoned, with the chilling corridors bearing testament to the sweat, tears, and desperation of those who chiseled them from the hard, unyielding earth. These tight, suffocating passageways, eerily lit by occasional slivers of dim light, were the site of countless tragedies. Numerous prisoners met their untimely end within this grim maze, either through unfortunate accidents or desperate acts of self-destruction. However, it seems their spirits are far from being at peace. Today, the chilling echoes of the inmates' despair reverberate through the tunnels. Unseen figures cast elusive, phantom shadows, their eerie presence sensed more often than seen, while an inexplicable chill permeates the air. I gotta say, haunted tunnels underneath an abandoned prison. It truly does not get more creepy than that. In our number 4 spot today, we have La Santé Prison. In the vibrant center of Paris, amidst the iconic landmarks and bustling cafes, stands an imposing structure with a sinister legacy. La Santé Prison. This foreboding edifice harbors a disturbing secret that makes its shadowy corners and dimly lit halls even more chilling. Its ghostly denizen is none other than the figure of a former warden, ominously dubbed with a nickname I can't even say here on YouTube, but what I will say is the name was inspired by his reign as warden, during which the prison witnessed an alarming surge in inmates taking their own lives, a morbid correlation that cemented his place in the prison's dreadful lore. Even now, his spectral presence is palpable, with visitors reporting the phantom echoes of his heavy footsteps clanging down the corridors and his whispers rustling like the chilling wind. These eerie manifestations serve as a stark reminder of the prison's horrifying past, ensuring that its gruesome legacy is never forgotten, but instead hauntingly alive. In our number 3 spot today, we have Ohio State Reformatory. Also known as Mansfield Reformatory, this spooky place is a former prison located in Mansfield, Ohio. It opened in 1896 and closed in 1990. While the prison is known for its feature in The Shawshank Redemption, the real horrors lie in its violent history and inhumane conditions, with reports of harm, bad conditions, and overcrowding. The prison is also rumored to be haunted, with many visitors reporting strange occurrences, such as cold spots, unexplained noises, and ghostly apparitions. One of the most famous ghosts said to haunt the prison is that of Helen Glatke, the wife of a former superintendent who died in a car accident outside the prison. Her spirit is said to still wander the prison, often appearing in the chapel or in the administration area. Another famous ghost is that of the quote ghost in the tower, believed to be the spirit of a former inmate who died in a tragic accident while working in the prison's bell tower. Visitors have reported hearing his screams and seeing his ghostly figure in the tower. In our number 2 spot today, we have Alcatraz. Welcome to the infamous Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary, a desolate rock in the San Francisco Bay. In its active years, it held the likes of Al Capone, who is said to have played his banjo in the eerie silence. Abandoned in 1963, the echoing sounds of cell doors slamming shut still haunt the silent corridors. Visitors claim to hear ghostly whispers and footsteps, often attributed to the restless spirits of the prisoners who met untimely ends. Alcatraz most haunting secret? The chilling tale of Cell 14D, said to be the home to a malevolent entity. Prisoners claim to be tormented by a creature with glowing eyes. A visit to this cell leaves visitors feeling unnaturally cold, even on the warmest days. And finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have Eastern State Penitentiary. The Eastern State Penitentiary is located in Philadelphia, and of course it used to be a prison, but it is now an abandoned and extremely haunted house. This prison used to house some pretty big profile prisoners such as Al Capone, again, as well as Willie Sutton, but it was different from the American prisons we are used to now. This is because this prison was entirely separate incarceration. The inmates would live, sleep, eat, and everything else alone. When they were removed from their cells, they would have hoods placed over their heads as well. Considering all we now know about how detrimental isolation is, this of course must have taken an immense toll on the prisoners. Besides this, there were also some pretty gruesome and horrible punishments in this prison, such as having prisoners' tongues chained to their wrists. I'm not honestly even sure how you would do that, but apparently it was a thing. This prison now sees thousands of voluntary visitors every year, and there have been plenty of reports of creepy paranormal happenings. These include shadowy figures, hearing creepy laughter that doesn't belong to anyone living, and hearing footsteps throughout the prison. I feel like considering all that went on when the prison was still active, it truly does make sense that this building would be a haunted one. Whether haunted by their history or the spirits of former inmates, these prisons are a spine-tingling reminder of humanity's darkest chapter.
Starting off this countdown, we have Eastern State Penitentiary. Built in 1829, Eastern State Penitentiary was known for housing some of the biggest criminals, such as Al Capone. The conditions in this prison weren't the best. Prisoners were kept in complete solitude, seeing nobody else besides the guards. Whenever they would leave their cell, guards would cover their heads so that they couldn't see anyone else and no one could see them. That alone would drive them insane. But they didn't stop there. The guards would often torture the inmates by soaking them in cold water and then letting them dry outside during the winter time. The prison closed in 1971, and now apparently the ghost of the prisoners haunt the walls, seeking revenge on the guards. In our 9th spot, we have Atlanta Prison Farm. The Atlanta Prison Farm, also known as the Honor Farm, first opened its doors in around 1918. The plan for this prison was for criminals to work off their sentences by doing labor work. This was only for the prisoners that were deemed trustworthy enough. In fact, they really believed that this would be a solid plan, so there were hardly any security. However, it didn't turn out to be such a good idea. There were a lot of gangs at this prison, which resulted in a lot of prisoners getting hung and killed. The prison closed its doors in 1995. But in October of 2009, a fire burnt a large section of the prison. Firefighters didn't even care at all. They didn't try to even attempt to extinguish the fire. Now what remains of the prison is badly vandalized, and pictures of the inside show that it's not the safest place to visit. In our 8th spot, we have H.M. Pentridge Prison. Her Majesty's Prison Pentridge, or H.M. Prison Pentridge, was an Australian prison established in 1851. Now the problem with this prison was that it was meant to hold 650 prisoners and only 100 guards. But soon the prison became overcrowded with thousands of prisoners. In fact, a large percentage of the prison population died inside the prison. This was due to monthly stabbings, bludgeonings, and bashings. The prison closed on May 1st, 1997 due to a bunch of riots and scandals. But because so many people died there, they actually had to bury them on the prison's ground. Over the years, bones of the prisoners have been found in and around the prison. So I suggest not going there unless you want to stumble upon some human remains. Coming in at number 7, we have Moundsville Prison. Moundsville, West Virginia Penitentiary was built in 1876, and it looks a lot like a medieval fortress. But this prison wasn't designed to hold a lot of inmates. They each were meant to have their own 5-foot by 7-foot cell. That's extremely small. But eventually overcrowding became an issue, and up to 3 inmates were placed in one cell. 2 were on super small bunk beds, while the other slept on a mattress on the floor by the toilet. The conditions weren't the best, that's for sure. Before the prison was abandoned in 1995, a lot of death sentences were carried out there. 85 men were hung and 9 were electrocuted. This prison saw the worst of the worst criminals. One of the more notable inmates was Harry Powers, the Lonely Hearts Killer. He would use newspaper ads to lure lonely women to him, with ads saying that he was looking for love and marriage, but instead he would rob and kill them. Now, Tom Stiles, the caretaker of the penitentiary, said that multiple inmates would complain about the prison being haunted. So even before criminals were killed there, the prison was already haunted by other spirits. Now it's even more haunted with the ghosts of the criminals as well. Making our way down the list at number 6, we have Old Essex County Jail. Located in New Jersey, this jail was built in 1937 and has a very creepy Victorian style to it. Over the time, the prison expanded and had its own cafeteria, hospital, auditorium, and gallows in the yard to hang the murderers. The prison closed in 1970 and now is deemed very unsafe to trespassers. Some of the floors are at risk for caving in at any second. Plus, the walls are now covered in creepy vandalism and graffiti. And inmates' files are now scattered all over the floor of the auditorium, along with empty tear gas containers and shotgun shells. So what really went on in that prison? We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with Wyoming Territorial Prison. Built in 1872, this prison is one of the oldest buildings in Wyoming. From 1872 to 1890, it was a federal penitentiary, and from 1890 to 1901, it was a state prison. But this prison faced a lot of issues. The first one being that there were a lot of jailbreaks. Within the first 2 years of operation, out of the 44 prisoners there, 11 of them managed to escape. Then over the course of the next couple of years, they struggled with overcrowding. They also had to deal with a number of ghost fires. Yeah, fires would start out of nowhere in the prison. Over the years, the prison was used less and less, and actually was under capacity. At one point, they only had 3 prisoners. Now, the prison was famous for housing the murderer Julius Greenwald, who is said to haunt the area. In fact, he was known for being really good at rolling cigars. And if you visit the prison today, the faint smell of his cigar smoke will follow you around. Moving on at number 4, we have the Garcia Moreno Prison. Located in Ecuador, this abandoned prison is nightmare fuel. Inside of the prison, there are a bunch of haunting images that the inmates left behind. So to pass time, they would make murals or sketches on the walls. Most of them are pretty dark and gruesome, showcasing their misery from being locked up. So originally this prison was built to only hold 300 inmates, but it reached 8 times its capacity, squeezing inmates inside. They weren't living in the best conditions, and by taking a tour of the area, you can see it for yourself firsthand, if you dare. I don't recommend it. In our 3rd spot, we have Alcatraz. Of course, this is probably one of the most famous prisons in the world. Alcatraz was a maximum security federal prison built from 1910 to 1912. It first served as a prison for military prisoners, but over the years, it was known to be home of the biggest and baddest criminals. It was also known as being an inescapable prison, but the prison closed in 1963 since it was getting too costly to run. Now it's rumored to be very haunted. Apparently, prisoners were often tortured there by guards with chains, knives, and tasers. Lots of prisoners actually died while locked up there. Legend goes that if you visit the prison, you will be able to hear the sounds of endless weeping and screams. Others have reported hearing music coming from one of the cells, and even got locked in a cell by a trickster ghost. So yeah, definitely do not recommend you visit this prison unless you want to end up behind bars. Literally. Coming in at number 2, we have Port Arthur Prison. Built in 1833, Port Arthur Prison was referred to as Australia's Alcatraz. It was deemed inescapable, and it was known to house only the biggest and baddest criminals. From 1833 to 1853, Port Arthur was a place for convicted British criminals. Rumor has it that these prisoners were psychologically tortured there. It operated under the principle of isolation, silence, and control. As a result, a lot of prisoners were driven mad in solitary confinement. The prison was shut down in 1877, and then in 1895 and 1897, devastating fires destroyed some of the prison. Here's the thing, the prison and the entire land is said to be cursed. In 1997, a man named Martin Bryant killed 35 people and wounded 23 more on the land. This massacre is considered the worst massacre in the modern history of Australia. As a result, the prison and the surrounding area is pretty much abandoned. And in our number 1 spot, we have Holmesburg Prison. The Holmesburg Prison opened in 1896 and was nicknamed the Terror Dome, and you'll understand why shortly. Tons of very horrific incidents occurred at this prison. From 1938, half of the prisoners went on a hunger strike because of complaints about the food. As punishment, the leaders of the strike were taken to a building that had several cells lined with radiators and steam pipes. The windows and air ducts were closed closed off, and they raised the temperatures in the building to nearly 200 degrees. This happened during an August heat wave. As a result, several of the prisoners died from being boiled alive. Others suffered from horrific burns. But that's not all. One of the prison doctors would conduct unethical experiments on the prisoners, exposing them to herpes, radiation, psychoactive drugs, and more. Then in 1970, a riot took place in the prison. The inmates were armed with meat cleavers, knives, and makeshift pitchforks. They then went around trashing the dining hall and killing each other. Then in 1973, the prison's warden and the deputy were stabbed to death by the inmates. Finally, the prison closed in 1995, and due to its horrific past, no one wants to visit there.
Starting us off at number 10 is Pitak. This Russian high-security prison is located on a small lake island called Ognin Ostrov and is known to hold very dangerous criminals. It's 400 kilometers north of Moscow and was converted from a monastery to a prison after the October Revolution of 1917. It was home to Stalin's purge victims in the 30s and 40s, but was used for any and all criminals after his death. By 1997, things changed again and the prison was used to house only people serving life sentences. Russian prisons are bad enough, as you can probably imagine, but this one was the absolute worst. Yes, there was no fighting each other and rape, but the regime was inhuman. Each inmate was kept in a tiny two-man cell for 22.5 hours a day, and for an hour and a half, they would just stand in the cage outside their cell. There was also no bathrooms at the facility, and anyone who's there is definitely psychologically damaged. Now, there are only two ways to get in or out. One is by foot on these two ancient-ass bridges that will most likely break as soon as you step foot on them, and the other is by prison boat. No one has ever escaped Pitak. Anyone who's tried to swim away was shot by the watching guards, and anyone who's tried to dig their way out has just hit water. Coming in at number 9 is Alcatraz, and Lord knows this one had to be on the list. If there's one island that has a notoriously bad reputation that everyone knows, it is Alcatraz. Located in San Francisco Bay, the island is home to the oldest operating lighthouse on the west coast and a notoriously well-known prison. Before the prison, the island was inhabited by Native Americans for thousands of years, and by 1934 it was turned into a maximum security prison, and during the 29 years the prison was in use, the penitentiary claimed no prisoner ever escaped successfully. 36 tried, 23 were caught, 2 drowned, 6 were shot while trying to escape, and 5 were never found and presumed dead. Al Capone was in there, George Machine Gun Kelly, Alvin Creepy Carpus. So many notorious criminals were held in Alcatraz, like the island is just oozing history. The guards were very well trained to guard the men, but they had no clue about rehabilitation. On the 11th of June 1962, 3 inmates put their escape plan into action. They'd created papier-mâché dummies and stuck hair on them collected from the prison's barbershop and left them in their cells as decoys. They then escaped through a tunnel they had spent a year digging with a spoon. From there they went to an unused service corridor, to a ventilation shaft, and finally to the roof. From there they scaled a fence and made a DIY raft out of things they had stolen and set sail at 10 p.m. Guards didn't realize the trio were missing till the next morning, but the men were never seen again. The FBI spent ages looking for them near and around the area, but after 17 years of investigating, they concluded the trio most likely just drowned in the water, so no one actually did ever escape, or maybe they did. At number 8 we have Dongguan Prison. Now this Chinese prison takes up most of the island of Hsinchu, and it opened back in 1988. In 2013 it had around 5,000 prisoners in it, but I'm assuming it collected a lot more people in the next 7 years. 10% of the inmates are foreigners, and given China's slightly sus record, I don't know if their families even know they're stuck in a Chinese prison. Ex-inmates share that they were beaten unless they helped produce goods like headphones, Samsonite luggage logs, Porsche cars, and more. If they didn't do as they were told, they'd be tasered, beaten, or just put in solitary confinement. And it's not like this only happened to them if they refused. If they actually worked but failed to meet their production targets, they'd also suffer, so there was just really no winning. From my research, I couldn't find any inmate that had escaped the prison, but I mean, I also don't know if they'd report it because it makes them look bad. Either way, the prison is a shit show. Filling at number 7 slot is Goli Otok, aka the Croatian Alcatraz. Currently uninhabited, the island used to be used as a high-security political prison between 1949 and 1989 when Croatia was still part of Yugoslavia. The island has no life whatsoever in terms of vegetation, which links to its name Goli Otok, which translates to barren island. During World War I, Austria-Hungary sent Russian prisoners of war to the prison. It was then used for any communists and Stalin sympathizers, but also for non-political political prisoners as well. Join the party, the more the merrier. Criminals in general were sent there to die, and apparently 400 to 600 people actually did. Other sources claimed it was close to 4,000 victims. Are they victims though, because they're criminals? I don't know. Touchy subject. The island would get extremely hot in the summer and even colder in the winter, which made conditions almost unbearable. The whole operation was also entirely inmate run, which meant they beat the out of each other, as you can well imagine. Now at number 6 is Nusa Kambangan Island, sometimes known as Execution Island or the Alcatraz of Indonesia, because apparently every country has its own version of Alcatraz now. This island is in the Indian Ocean just off the south coast of Java. The island doesn't have just one prison, it has 9 supermax prisons for the scummiest of the human race. Terrorists, convicted murderers, traffickers, and more. Now the island was made during the Dutch colonial rule over Indonesia, so it was opened back in the 20s. It was known as the harshest penal punishment in Asia, and even after they gained independence from the Netherlands, the island was still used for convicts by President Suharto. Out of the 9 prisons on the island, only 4 are still in use today, which is still 4. That's a lot. A lot of the inmates were political prisoners who were never tried and who kind of just died from hunger or disease. People have escaped from the prison before, don't get me wrong, so it's not impossible per se. You can escape from one prison and walk by the other one undetected. Or do you think all the prisons on the island have integrated databases in case someone does escape and they're like, oh, he's on our list, he's from that prison? I don't know. I feel like that would be the, best thing to do, If I was a prison official, I would do that. Coming in at number 5 is Robben Island. This island is located north of Cape Town and is only 5.18 kilometers squared large in area. It was fortified and made into a prison at the end of the 17th century and operated well after the end of apartheid. It's always been used to mainly house political prisoners, their most famous one being Nelson Mandela, who was incarcerated there for 18 of his 27 years in jail. Before turning into a jail, it was used as a leper colony since no one knew what leprosy was or how to cure it, so they thought isolating all the infected was just the best way to go. The maximum security prison was shut down in 1991, and the medium security prison, which I didn't even know was a thing, was closed in 1996, and now it's currently a popular tourist destination and a World Heritage Site. In 1819, a huge escape plot was in place where Khosa Prophet Makana and 30 other inmates boarded 3 boats trying to escape their fate. Sadly, the boats capsized and all but 4 prisoners died. At number 4 is Imrala. This Turkish prison island has an area of 9.98 square kilometers and is located in the Sea of Marmara. It served many uses during its long history, and Pliny the Elder even mentioned it in his work, so it is old. In 1308, it was conquered by this new and upcoming Ottoman navy, and by 1913, the island had a school, 250 houses, a monastery, and over 1,000 residents. In 1935, the island opened up a semi-open category prison where inmates earn income by fishing and working in agriculture. Conveniently enough, the area around the island is a forbidden zone, so as a local of Turkey, you can't go near it, you can't fish near it, you can't sail near it, absolutely nothing. From 1999 to 2009, it was a maximum security prison for its one solitary prisoner, Abdullah Öcalan. Abdullah was the leader of the Kurdistan Workers' Party, which is a militant political organization trying to secure the independence of Kurdistan. The most notable person that ever escaped the prison was Billy Hayes, an American student who was incarcerated for trying to smuggle hash out of the country. Students and their drugs. Filling at number 3 slot is Spike Island. Located in Cork Harbour Island, the island was very strategically placed, making it good for defense and to house prisoners. The prison opened on the island back in 1847 to help deal with the excess number of convictions during the Great Famine. Dude, people were hungry. Are we surprised it was stealing? No. Now, a few years into its opening, it gained a reputation as, take a wild guess, Ireland's Alcatraz. IRA prisoners were sent there during the Irish War of Independence, and at its peak it housed 1,400 people. At the end of the 20th century, it was used as a youth correctional facility, and they all staged a riot in 1985, which resulted in one of the accommodation logs burning down completely. The prison closed its doors in 2004, and the history of the prison's escapes is one to look at. Henry Swears tried escaping in 1863, but with rough water conditions was forced to turn back. Ooh, that wasn't gonna be good. A successful attempt was done by William Johnstone, who also escaped twice from 2 other jails before being sent to Spike, so I mean, he had a good track record. He tried escaping once but was caught, yet his second attempt saw him vanish into the night, never to return again. Now at number 2 is Salvation's Islands Part 1. So I know that sounds very transformative, but they were only called that because missionaries used to go there to get away from the mainland. Either way, the group of small islands are located off the coast of French Guiana and are made up of 3 islands. We have Devil's Island, St. Joseph Island, and Royale Island. Now, Devil's Island used to be a French penal colony back in the 19th and 20th century, and it used to receive convicts from the main prison of the empire as well as anyone that had been deported from the Second French Empire. At 40 meters above sea level, the island is located in such treacherous circumstances that escape is ridiculously hard. The surrounding area is incredibly rocky and dangerous, and the water is shark infested. Prison officials actually travel to the other islands by cable car because they also refuse to go in the water. Shark infested? I'd rather rot in this prison than try and be in that water. Like, nah, B. As if the exterior wasn't bad enough, and believe me, it's pretty damn shit, the interior was even worse. The prison island was known for its merciless treatment of its inmates to the point it had a 75% death rate. One of the most famous prisoners was Captain Alfred Dreyfus, who many of you have probably heard of. I hadn't before this video, just being truthful. You're probably wondering why I mentioned all 3 islands when I'm only talking about one right now. Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves, shall we? And finally, at number 1 is Salvation's Islands Part 2. Royale Island was used to house the general criminals, I'm guessing the ones that went very horrible, and the conditions were pretty free because even the prison officials knew escape was hard. So they were like, the inmates are most likely not gonna try, so they may as well just live freely, you know what I mean? Now, St. Joseph Island, on the other hand, was the reclusion island where prisoners were sent to be put in solitary confinement and complete darkness for offenses like attempted escape, for example. In the colony's entire history, 8 people have tried to escape, one of whom died, some of whom were recaptured, and some of whom were actually successful. By 1938, the French stopped sending prisoners to the islands, and by 1953, the system was closed altogether.
At number 10, we have Ohio State Reformatory, aka Mansfield Reformatory. Yes, this is the reformatory that was made famous in the film The Shawshank Redemption. It was opened up in 1896 as a place for prisoners that were too old for juvie, but not hardened enough for the penitentiary in the state. So at one point, it was applauded as a place that could humanely reform first-time offenders. But its conditions deteriorated to the point that it became known for abuse, torture, and murder. The inmates even filed a lawsuit against it, saying it was unfit for human occupation. But even after that, it stayed open until 1986. Ever since it closed, there have been stories of the paranormal occurring there. Mainly, apparitions and footsteps of the former inhabitants have been encountered. Some people have even said they have had unsettling encounters in the cells where many of the inmates suffered and some died. A resident ghost of the prison is said to be the late wife of one of the wardens. She died in 1950 in an apartment in the administration wing of the prison. She died when a loaded handgun fell from a closet shelf and went off. Her spirit has remained in the apartment ever since, and it typically manifests in the smell of perfume. At number 9, Missouri State Penitentiary, aka The Walls. So this prison was built in the early 1930s, and the initial prison population was under 20 people. Obviously, it grew to numbers much greater than that until its closure in 2004. And it saw quite a few infamous prisoners. They include Charles Pretty Boy Floyd and James Earl Ray. So during the time the prison was operational, 40 inmates were executed within its gas chambers. Also, in 1954, there was a major riot at the prison. Police and patrols from all around Missouri had to go to try to stop the riot and lessen the disturbance. The riot led to the death of 4 inmates, the injury of 29 inmates and 4 guards, and several buildings being seriously burned. Times magazine once called it the bloodiest 47 acres in America for all the violence that happened at the penitentiary. Also, it's no surprise that ever since it's been closed, it's been a hotspot for eerie encounters and sightings. Visitors have said they've encountered lingering spirits, either seeing them or hearing them. That can range from footsteps throughout the halls or seeing what they think is a former inmate and then it disappearing. At number 8, Old Idaho Penitentiary. The Old Idaho Penitentiary housed prisoners from 1872 to 1973. The conditions of the prison were abysmal, especially as time went on, since infrastructure didn't keep up with the times. This led to the riots that eventually led to prisoners of Old Idaho to be moved to a more modern prison in 1973. Over the 100 years of the prison, 110 inmates died from old age, illness, and murder, and 10 state executions took place there. In recent years, many people who visit Old Idaho see or hear things they can't explain, sometimes even things caught on camera. These reports of experiences include people hearing voices, feeling like they were physically touched, or feeling a sense of heaviness or strange feeling. The website for the penitentiary says these occurrences are more frequent in Siberia, which is the solitary confinement cells, and the gallows room in the maximum security cell house. At number 7, Maxwell Street Police Station. So this police station was built in 1889 and became a notorious police station known for corruption, bribery, brutality, and torture. In part, this may have been because the likes of the Jenna brothers were from the area, and that was a pair that partnered with Al Capone's operation to make prohibited liquor within blocks of the police station. Allegedly, many criminals were sent down to the basement and they didn't make it out alive. While it's now used as a part of the set for the TV show Chicago PD, there are stories that souls still linger there. Screams of the people tortured or killed in the dungeon have been reported to echo from the basement, and people have also heard crying, moaning, and the sounds of rattling bars and handcuffs. At number 6, we have Central Unit Prison. So Central Unit Prison opened in 1909 and was closed down in 2011. One of its famous inmates was musician Leadbelly. So an unfortunate aspect of the prison was the inflated numbers of African Americans it imprisoned under the discriminatory black codes. They did this in order to supply labor for the state's convict lease system, where you could lease a convict to do labor for you. Unsurprisingly, this has been called slavery by another name. Since its closing, only one group was able to explore the abandoned prison, and it was Ghost Adventures. They documented blasts of cold air, spikes of electrical charges on an EMF, and one member felt a heaviness on his chest. This led to that member feeling lightheaded, kind of floaty, and overall weird, so he had to take a break. Lastly, they caught a shadow figure on a camera that they couldn't outright explain. Even if there were more ghosts there that no one saw, it has been closed to the public since, and the zone people have been trying to figure out what to do with the land. So who knows just how many ghosts or paranormal things are there. But let's move on to number 5, Lake County Jail. So this jail was built in 1908 in Crown Point, Indiana. During its early years, county sheriffs were required to live at the jail. Because of this, it was a combined residence with the family's living area, warden's residence, department offices, 150 cells, maximum security accommodations, an institutional kitchen, food storage, heating and cooling systems, a barber shop, and a garage. Did you keep track of how many things? It was basically its own little town. In 1934, the gangster John Dillinger escaped the prison, which has since made the jail somewhat infamous. It closed down in the 70s and was turned into a historic site. Over the past 2 decades, there have been restorations on the site, and there have been stories about hauntings taking place there. In the cells and hallways of the jail, strange photographs have been taken. Doors open and close by themselves, and lights turn on and off. Some have even heard disembodied footsteps and voices, and both volunteers at the historic site and visitors have had these experiences. Let's move on to number 4, Ohio Penitentiary. This penitentiary was opened in 1834 and closed down in 1979. Back in the early 1900s, it was condemned by reformers due to stories coming out of it. From cholera outbreaks to murders and executions, it was full of death. But fire was the biggest bane. In April of 1930, a huge blaze swept through the west block of the prison, taking the lives of 322 inmates in a single night. Even while the prison was still open, inmates would complain about seeing apparitions or ghostly figures. After the penitentiary was torn down, rumors of those same sightings around the ruins was quick to spread. In its place now is a sport arena, which is still rumored to be haunted. Number 3, Fort Delaware. Fort Delaware was built in 1859 as a prison camp for Confederate prisoners of war during the Civil War. It was mainly known for its role as a prison, with nearly 13,000 prisoners kept within the wooden barracks. The living conditions were horrifying, as food rations were small and nearly inedible. Plus, the water was putrefied. Scurvy, smallpox, and severe malnutrition were common. The prisoners were so famished that sergeants would throw rats into the crowds. They would laugh as they watched the imprisoned men struggle for a piece of the meat. Around 2,700 men died within those walls, and many of their spirits are said to linger within the haunted walls. Its dark history made it a popular spot for paranormal enthusiasts, and the dungeons where prisoners were held is said to be a particularly active spot. Number 2, Alcatraz. Alcatraz goes down in history as the ultimate American prison. It initially started out as a military prison, but it was reopened in 1933 to be an escape-proof federal prison for the worst of all the lawbreakers. It was known for housing Al Capone, George Machine Gun Kelly, and Doc Barker, among others. Due to the limited privileges and the confinement of the inmates, murder, suicide, and insanity became frequent. There were bloody and violent breakout attempts, and one was proven successful. 3 bank robbers vanished into the bay, never to be found again. It was closed 1 year after that successful escape in 1963. Today, it is operated by the National Park Service, who have had some of their staff members report ghosts or other paranormal happenings on the property. Things like strange sounds, screams, yells, weeping, and eerie music. Lastly, at number 1, Eastern State Penitentiary. The Quakers founded Eastern State Penitentiary in 1829 as a prison of total isolation. It was once the most famous and expensive prisons in the world, mainly because of the unbearably strict rules about inmate communication. The only people the inmates were allowed to communicate with were the wardens and guards. This was set in place as a way to attempt to reform the individuals. But the solitary confinement led many to being driven insane by the solitude. To break the rules was to guarantee an extreme punishment, which drove to suicides being common. At the prison, solitary confinement ended in the 1870s, and the prison closed down a century later. Ever since it's been closed, paranormal encounters have been common there. People talk of ghost stories such as apparitions, mysterious footsteps, and other strange sounds. With all that happened there, it's believable.
Number 10, Moundsville Penitentiary, West Virginia. Oh, take me home, country roads to the place I belong, West Virginia. Okay, that's enough of that. I think me singing will haunt your dreams more than any of the places on this list. Well, first we have the Moundsville Penitentiary. This place opened in 1879 and quickly became one of the most violent prisons in America. That's basically being the heavyweight champion of violent prisons. In the time that this prison was open, there was 36 homicides and a bunch of executions. So you better believe that this place is packed full of ghosts that walk the halls. One of the most famous ghosts wasn't even an inmate. People say they've seen the ghost of a maintenance man who used to work there. He was brutally beaten to death by the inmates because he would inform the guards when the inmates were misbehaving. Snitches? Get stitches, baby. The game is the game. The Moundsville Penitentiary is known as the most haunted place on earth. So the moral of the story goes, don't snitch, or you're gonna end up a ghost around a bunch of the people that you snitched on. Number 9, Bodmin Jail. Now we're gonna shoot over to Cornwall, England and check out the Bodmin Jail. I would have hated to go to jail back in the day. I'm sure it would have been easier to break out, but the conditions would have been horrible. At least they have Purell now. The Bodmin Jail is one of those old school hellholes. It was built back in 1779 and managed to stay open for 100 years. Now it stands as a major hotspot for paranormal activity. They got it all at the Bodmin Jail. Weird voices, footsteps, loud bangs, soft touches on your bum before a wet kiss. You know, all the stuff that ghosts do all the time. The most famous ghost that hangs within the walls is the spirit of Selena Wade. She got locked up for drowning her kids, so it's safe to say she's terrifying. It's said that whenever mothers come to visit the jail, it's said that she'll harass them, trying to get the visiting mothers to forgive her for the crimes that she committed. So don't drown your kids. Number 8, Cripple Creek Jail. When the population of a town starts to skyrocket, a few things will always happen. Rent goes up, and then you have to move into a place with 67 roommates. Jobs disappear, so you better behave yourself at work unless you want to start selling off your respect for money. And of course, local anemones are usually not equipped to deal with anything. That's what happened in Cripple Creek in the late 1800s when the gold rush hit. People's lust for striking rich overnight shot this town up from 1,500 to 50,000 people in a very short period of time. This of course made the crime shoot through the roof and then forced a small town to try and find ways to manage all the prisoners. This led to many deaths at the Cripple Creek Jail, both on the sides of inmates and guards. It's actually said that one of the most famous ghosts hanging around the jail today is that of a female guard. People say she stayed behind to keep the other ghosts in prison. Give this girl a raise. She has allegiance even in death, baby. Number 7, Eastern State Penitentiary. This penitentiary in Philadelphia was open for 42 years and had the reputation for being one of the most brutal prisons of all time. Inmates were treated worse than cattle. They would be kept in near total isolation for 23 hours a day. The rooms that they were kept in had 0 windows. That means no sunlight is getting through. You gotta get that vitamin D. Staying away from the sun for a long time is really bad for your health. Well, I mean, so is going to jail, but whatever. Guards would also torture inmates in brutal ways. One thing they would do is take inmates who had misbehaved and put them in a place called the hole. This was a dark pit in the ground with zero light and hardly any room to move. While in the hole, they would be given just enough food and water to survive, and after their time was up, the guards would pull out their nearly lifeless bodies and throw them back into a secluded cell. Many inmates went mad or died from the isolation, and ghosts have been spotted all over the prison, especially in the rooms where these tortures would take place. Number 6. Ararat County Jail. Now we're going down under to Australia. A country built by criminals must have had some of the worst prisons of all time. Imagine being such a monster that you get locked up when you're living around criminals? You would have to be a baby eater dog kicker or something terrible like that. Well, the Ararat County Jail was a place where you would send these kinds of people. What made this place especially terrible is that it was a prison for the criminally insane. So there were all sorts of treatments performed on patients. And by treatments, I mean lobotomies without anesthesia, along with shock treatment, and an array of other horrible things that no human should have to endure. It's said that you can hear the screams of people who were tortured there to this day. One of the most famous ghosts that lurk the halls is that of Nurse Carrie, a nurse who defends her ward and tries to stop people from coming in. She still doesn't want the public to know about the terrible things they would do to patients. Well, the word's out, Carrie. Everyone knows you're a turd. Number 5. The London Tower. This is probably the most famous one on the list. The London Tower is over 900 years old and is a major hotspot for tourists. If you're a ghost, this is the place to haunt. You get to scare thousands of people every year and probably photobomb everybody. Imagine being the ghost that everyone talks about at the London Tower. How glamorous. It was originally made as a safe haven for the royal family, but got converted into a prison not long after that. Everything went down from there. Prisoners would be tortured, tried, and executed all in the big brick building. So you can imagine there's some major bad mojo floating around. The tower is constantly guarded by the royal guard, and when new guards are stationed there, many of them have reported a crushing sensation in their chest. I'm guessing the ghosts want to see if you're a punk weenie before they let you work there. The most famous ghost is probably that of Queen Anne Boleyn, one of the wives of Henry VIII. She was beheaded in the London Tower. Very fancy. Number 4. Ohio State Reformatory. For those of you who are movie buffs, you are really going to like this one, because this is where they filmed Shawshank Redemption. Yeah, one of the greatest movies of all time. And if you like hostile encounters with ghosts, like being shoved or yelled at, then this is the place for you. You have no excuse not to check it out. The place was built in Mansfield, Ohio between the years of 1886 and 1910. This place was a hoot and a holler when it went up, and quickly got the reputation for having some of the worst conditions of any prison. Jolly gee, sign me up, mister. In fact, in 1910 the prison was shut down because the conditions were inhumane. My god, it sounds like a great vacation spot. Now they just keep it open for ghost tours. If you decide to go there, you should prepare yourself for everything from phones malfunctioning to cold spots to straight up being pushed. You know what they say about these Ohio State ghosts? They are great hosts. Number 3. Alcatraz. If you live in North America, then this is probably the most famous prison to you. I mean, it's one of the most legendary places in the world. Some of the worst criminals ever spent time in there. By spent time in there, you know I mean forced to stay there because of their horrible crimes. Al Capone being one of the most famous criminals who was caged at the Rock. This place was so rough that murders, attacks, and suicides were commonplace. A murder going down to Alcatraz was like someone who leaves negative YouTube comments having a girlfriend pillow. It's extremely common. Even before the prison was built, the Native Americans would use the island as a place to exile people, and they believed dark spirits lived on the island. There was even a case of an inmate saying he could see glowing red eyes in his cell and started screaming. In the morning, he was found dead with strangle marks on his neck. Number 2. Kurostka Naval Port Prison. Let's run over to the Soviet prison that was opened in the year 1900. I wouldn't want to get thrown in a Russian prison now, man. Imagine back then. They probably didn't even have blankets. You probably kept yourself warm through mental toughness. This place was built in Latvia and used as a detention center for the Russian military who broke some war laws. I don't know what war laws are, but you can leave them in the comments. It's stated on the record that no one ever escaped this jail, but it was built in the middle of nowhere. So if you ever did escape this jail, you would probably just freeze to death or be eaten by a bear. Now you can go there to do something they call Extreme Night, where they let you spend the night in the jail. A place that is haunted by dead war criminals? That's a hard pass for me. And number 1 on the list, the Shepton Mallet Prison. We're gonna top off this list with the Shepton Mallet Prison in Somerset, England. Until the year 2013, this prison was the oldest operating prison in the world. It was built in the year 1625. I didn't even know that was legal. If I was there, I would keep asking the question, is this up to code? Even though I knew the answer was no, that would be like my little dad joke. I would tell everyone until someone shut me up by stabbing me in the liver. This place is so old that there are even unmarked graves around the prison from prisoners who died from smallpox. Goddamn, smallpox got you while you were in prison? That's a huge bummer. The prison is famous for housing some of the most dangerous prisoners in all of England and is also super haunted. There was even an attack where a guard was assaulted by an invisible assailant and got burned. At number 10, we have Corona Containment. There was recently a massive riot at a prison in Foggia, Italy. If you have been paying attention to what has been going on with the coronavirus, you will know that Italy has one of the worst outbreaks in the world. So many of the prisons throughout the country have been doing different things to make sure they don't have an outbreak in the prison. One of these things was reducing the amount of visitation that prisoners have from outside family members. It's a pretty simple solution, but inmates didn't like this at all. It was most likely crossed with the stress of coronavirus spreading like wildfire, but the prisoners had enough. They started a riot, and in all the mayhem, 16 prisoners were able to escape and run off to freedom. There were also 12 inmates that managed to break into the confiscated drug area and get super high. Frankly, they got too high. All 12 of them had an overdose. I guess that's one way to do it. You don't want to die in prison or the mayhem of the riot, so you just give yourself a lethal dose of drugs and then send off to another world. At number 9, we have the Arizona Trio. When you break out of jail, you think you'd want to keep a low profile. Like if I was ever in jail and then I broke out, my God, I would be on the run and you wouldn't hear a peep from me. But these guys were different. In 2015, there was a massive riot at the Arizona State Penitentiary, and in all the madness, 3 dudes managed to get outside of the prison. Now, the first thing they did was hide and find new clothes, but not long after they got their disguises figured out, they went and killed a couple that were on vacation in Arizona. They probably needed some money and supplies, but that can't be the smartest way to do it. It didn't take long, but the 3 murderers were caught and eventually sent back to where they just came from. At number 8, we have more COVID fears. As tensions rise about COVID-19 and many of the world's prisons are in terrible conditions, prisoners start to fear for their lives. The Buriram prison in Thailand was one of these places. Prisoners had heard of the worsening conditions of COVID-19 and decided that they weren't going to sit down and die. 100 inmates started to destroy everything in their path in an open area in the prison, until enough inmates and guards got involved. This was a very clever distraction and they were able to escape. This breakdown happened on March 28th, 2020, and it is unclear how many men were able to use this diversion to get out of the prison. A few men were once again detained, but some are still at large. At number 7, we have the Montana State Prison riot. Now, in this riot, there were a couple near escapes, but no one really got out, but the story is so crazy I had to put it on the list. It's like Bonnie and Clyde meets Shawshank Redemption meets Fast and the Furious 9. In the 1950s, the once great Montana State Prison had become one of the worst hellholes on the planet. The prison was packed to the brim with criminals, and the conditions were so horrible that inmates were constantly getting sick. There were 2 men who devised a plan to either change the prison or escape. It was Jerry Miles. He had been in the prison for so long he was one of the big dogs on campus, and his newly convicted 19-year-old boyfriend Lee Smart. They managed to get their hands on some gasoline from another inmate and created torches, and then they covered a guard in gasoline and threatened to light him on fire. The guard decided to turn over his weapons and keys in exchange for his life. From there, all hell broke loose. A ton of inmates were released from their cells and they killed the deputy warden. Not long after that, the National Guard arrived, and now the inmates were in a standoff. At this time, Miles and Lee and a few other inmates were attempting to tunnel out of the prison. They would have got out if they had only started earlier. The National Guard came in and most of the inmates laid down their weapons and accepted that the riot was over. But Lee and Miles weren't going down without a fight. The 2 ended up dying in a shootout with the National Guard. At number 6, we have ISIS members escaped. This riot just happened. On March 30th, 2020, a group of ISIS members being held at the Gurion prison in northern Syria started a riot. Prior to this happening, there was footage of them holding up a sign to a security camera in their cell. The sign demanded that their human rights be provided. After this display, the inmates were able to break the doors to their cell. They had been chipping away at the sides of the doors in preparation for this. A riot started and several of the Syrian Democratic forces that were guarding the prison were injured. In all the chaos, 12 men escaped, but the Syrian military was unclear about whether or not these men had been recaptured. At number 5, we have the riot in Rio. Back in 2017, tensions were starting to get high at a prison in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. At this particular prison, capacity was for 592 inmates, but 1,224 were in prison there. This combined with 2 feuding gangs led to a massive riot where 56 people were killed and many more escaped. The riot was so big that word came down the grapevine to 2 other prisons where the inmates there had riots in response. At one of those prisons, 86 men escaped, and one of the dudes escaping posted a picture of himself on Facebook while he was breaking out. That has to be his new profile picture for sure. At number 4, we have the Sao Paulo State Penitentiary inmates don't like social distancing. With the spread of this deadly virus, there have been a lot of changes. One of those changes was to the inmates at the Sao Paulo State Penitentiary. Many of these inmates are under partial sentences and are allowed to leave on certain days of the week. But with the spread of COVID-19, this freedom was taken away. Well, they were not having it. On March 16th, over 1,000 men rioted and overpowered the guards and broke free of the prison. Almost 200 were rearrested, but it's thought that over 1,000 inmates are still at large. Videos of men running from the prison in orange jumpsuits were posted all over the internet. At number 3, we have the New Mexico State Penitentiary riots. This is known as one of the most brutal riots of all time. During this riot, at least 5 prisoners escaped, but that was just a side story to what was actually going on. Inside the prison, the prisoners went crazy and took over the whole penitentiary. They took hostages. Most of the hostages were prison guards and the rest were inmates. Many prisoners took this time as an opportunity for revenge. There had been several inmates within the prison who had been working as informants to prison guards, and this is a big no-no in the prison world, so anyone who was known to be a rat was killed, and not fast. They were slowly tortured. It took 36 hours, but eventually police were able to regain control of this facility. At number 2, we have the Gaiwas escapees. Here's something I didn't know about Brazil. They have some of the deadliest prison riots in the world. People are frequently killed in prison riots over in Brazil. In 2017, 140 people died in prison riots, and in 2018 there was a massive riot at the prison in the city of Gaiwas. 2 rival gangs started a turf war in the prison and all hell broke loose. 14 people were killed, and of those men, one of them had their head sliced right off his body. During this time, 109 prisoners were able to escape. I also read when something like this happens, the guards just kind of let it happen, because if they try to intervene, they will just end up dying, so they kind of have no choice. For the number 1 spot, we have EDS and the Iranian prison riots. Electronic Data Services was a tech company working in Iran in the 1970s. They had been working with the Shah, and when the Ayatollah decided to storm the country and take control, it was time for EDS to get out of there. But in the process of trying to get everyone out, 2 American workers were captured, William Gaylord and Paul Chiparone. William Gaylord and Paul Chiparone were now locked up in an Iranian prison, which is probably a hell I can't even imagine. The American government wasn't going to step in, so it looked like both these men were lost to this horror, even though they committed no crime. Well, thankfully, they had the best boss in the world. Ross Perlott was the CEO and was determined to get his men free from this prison. He paid a mercenary to get a rebel group together to storm the prison. This caused a riot, and then the 2 men were able to escape. Dude, how has this not been a movie yet?